Good afternoon and welcome to the Social Work Today webinar, Innovation in Field Experience, Simulation and On-Site. We would like to thank our sponsor, University of New England's Online MSW program, for supporting today's session. Before we start the program, I have a quick point of housekeeping. At the end of the session, our panelists will be taking questions. However, you can submit questions at any time during the presentation. Simply use the question box in your control panel, and we will address as many questions as time allows. Now, it is my pleasure to hand the presentation off to our panelists to introduce themselves and to start the session. Welcome.
Hello, everyone. We're so excited for you to join us today. Today we're going to talk about what we call the SOS model, which stands for Simulation and On-Site Field Experiences. And really what we want to highlight today is field being the signature pedagogy of social work education, and how we have created a model that really looks to bridge the gap between academic courses and the practical application in field, and how we can do that, for all students, across the country in multiple programs. So my name is Christine Rogerson. I am a licensed clinical social worker here in the state of Maine, and I work for the University of New England as a field practicum coordinator, field faculty member. I did graduate myself from the University of New England's Master of Social Work programs many years ago, and now have the opportunity, as it says here in my bio, to kind of come full circle and to support students in their placement experiences. I have been a clinical social worker in the field for 13 years, and I am currently a social work PhD candidate at Simmons University.
Hello, everyone. My name is Wanda Anderson, and I have been a social worker for more than the past 30 years. I graduated a little over 30 years ago from the University of Hawaii. I have been at UNE for the last 17 years as a field faculty. I just wanted to share briefly that in my 30 years as a social worker, I've seen a lot of changes to the field, from the introduction of licensure across the United States for social workers to the beginning of computers in our field, and I'll talk briefly in a little bit about the beginning of moving into online learning. And I have to tell you that I'm extremely excited today to be a part of this conversation about simulation-based learning and beginning to add that to the field of what we already do. So thank you.
And I'm Rebecca Diggins. I am also a licensed clinical social worker in the state of Maine. I have been working in the field for over 14 years. I graduated from the Boston University School of Social Work and have spent many of the last 14 years working in group settings, working with teens and adults, and especially I'm passionate about working in the grief and loss field. I've been with UNE as a field practicum coordinator for a little over a year and a half, and am also very excited to share this new model and exciting form of simulation-based learning with you all.
So this is Wanda Anderson again. I want to talk to just a little bit as we begin today about the history of online social work education. We began to really experiment and begin to apply online social work education in the early 2000s. At that time, as we began to look at online MSW and BSW programs, it really opened the opportunity for individuals living in rural areas, people working full-time, those who were serving in our military, and those that had caretaking obligations. It really began to allow more individuals access to an online or an MSW education. So at the beginning, when we first began to do online social work education, I do want to say there was a lot of skepticism. There was a lot of reluctance in it. UNE, and I was a part of UNE at that time, was one of the first fully asynchronous programs in the country. In 2009, we began to offer a complete online program. And I have to tell you, the first couple of years being a part of this, the skepticism didn't die down for quite a while. We often were looking to place students in field placements across the country, and we routinely heard at the beginning, you can't offer online education for MSWs, it's not going to work. Now, quite some years later, we work with agencies across the country on a daily basis, and we talk about, how well the students are doing. We work with agencies that are willing to take multiple students of ours. So I think we've seen a real change over the years as more and more programs. And today, pretty much almost every program at a university that offers BSW or MSW offers some sort of, whether it's a hybrid, some online classes, or a fully online program. So it's really become a part of our education system. So having said all of that, we'll now begin to talk about what we think might be the next step in this learning.
Yeah, so in addition to the background about just online learning and social work in general, we thought it also might be helpful to discuss a little bit of background about simulation-based learning, or SBL in general as well. Other disciplines, especially nursing and the medical fields, have been using SBL for many years in their educational programs, and really at this point have developed best practices for the delivery of SBL, as well as established credibility and demonstrated the efficacy of their models. And if you research SBL in social work education, you'll find that SBL has also been used for some time. However, it's primarily been used in practice courses, and it doesn't traditionally count as field placement hours for students. And more recently, there have been a few social work programs that have begun offering simulation-based learning experience as part of their field education program. And that is traditionally in addition to what we know or the traditional models of field education. So why use simulation-based learning? What are the benefits of simulation? So what's really neat about simulation-based learning, especially in the social work field, is that you can draw from well-established experiential learning theories, and you can also design your simulated experiences to really target the CSWE competencies. And simultaneously, you can also address the barriers or the challenges that we know are often inherent in traditional models of field education. So some of these challenges that we often hear about for students and agencies out in the field is that there are vast differences in the quality and experience of field instructors. There's often inadequate resources within the agency to really devote time to students and their learning experiences. There's often limited time for student supervision because field instructors and supervisors have high workload demands, complex cases, again, limited resources. There's also limited opportunities for students to engage in direct practice depending on the ability of or the permission for clients to be working with students, as well as other opportunities within the agencies. There's a vast difference amongst students about what kinds of direct practice they're able to engage in. We also hear that there's limited opportunity to have, for students to have their practice observed in real time. We often hear that students are shadowing their supervisors or their field instructors, but very few times do we hear it the other way around, where the field instructors or supervisors are then turning around and shadowing or watching the students practice in real time. We've also found that students really have limited or sometimes no in the moment or direct feedback. Oftentimes feedback is given during field instruction meetings and is really based on the student's recollection of their practice, but not actually their observed practice. So additionally, when you use a holistic model of SBL, it really allows students to practice both procedural competency, which is the ability to perform and practice procedures or step-by-step progression throughout the helping process, as well as metacompetency, which is the ability to be introspective about one's cognitive and affective states and to practice self-regulation, self-reflection, and self-awareness. So in traditional models of field placement, we hope that procedural and metacompetency is practiced and that students have the opportunity to practice those things. However, we really have no way to guarantee that. Additionally, SBL allows students to engage in repetitive practice, the real-time observation and feedback that I discussed, as well as self-assessment, peer assessment, and supervisor assessment of their practice skills in the moment.
So why now? That's one of the big questions as we begin to talk about this. And I think, of course, one of the most obvious reasons why now is COVID-19. I think those of you that are joining us from other social work programs across the country, many of us began conversations somewhere in March of last year and began to pull our field students across this country and from placements in other countries. I think we all began to realize we needed to begin to look at things in a different way. A lot of programs, as I think Rebecca said a bit earlier, a lot of programs were doing some sort of simulation-based learning, possibly in some of the practice courses, some of the clinical elective courses, so we were beginning to do it some. There were some programs across the country that was maybe beginning to introduce it to the beginning of a field experience. So certainly COVID-19 was the beginning of that. I think here at UNE, the field team came together and began to talk about what were we going to do for some of our students that needed to graduate, and they were pulled out in March. We began to listen to stories that, were very unfortunate about students that, had left their jobs because they were in their final placements. We're really struggling financially. We needed to figure this out. Our accrediting body, CSWE, was beginning to make, concessions and trying to figure out ways that we could begin to get some of these students out into the field. I will share with you that as a field faculty person for more than 17 years, Christine Rogerson was the first one who called me one day and said, I'd like to talk about doing this, and I've shared this, and I share it as somewhat on a light note, but my immediate reaction was no, I don't think we're going to do that. And the more we talked about it, the more exciting it became, and it really seemed to make sense to be a way to begin to deal with the COVID-19 and everything that was coming out of it, but also in a way to begin to think about how to enhance the learning. I said at the beginning that one of the things that throughout my career being a social worker over 30 years is I've seen so many changes, and it seems to me somewhere between 8 and 12 years there's some sort of a shift somewhere. And I have to say at UNE, we were doing online education at the point in March about 11 years, so it really maybe was time to think about what do we add to it, what do we look at, how do we kind of make things better. So first and foremost, we began to create and develop this model to offer kind of an emergency help for the graduates that needed to complete their final semester. As we begin to put that forth and have students begin to do this, we also began to really look at some of the inequities in field education. I don't know the range or the age of, who's on the line. I know when I began a bachelor's degree 40 years ago, the cost of an education was very different. You were able to earn a lot of scholarships. The student loans were interest-free. There was a lot of different help 40 years ago. When I graduated, I didn't have nearly the debt our students do today. I also, went to school at a time when it was more standard, I think, to be able to work less and go to school. Today, we see so many other obligations that some of our students have. So in looking at this new model, one of the things we're hoping, and I think Christine might talk a little bit more about this, but this idea that it might level some of the inequities in field education. The other piece is also the possibility of increasing accessibility and supports. The accessibility is, again, for students that are more challenged in being able to get to their placements, and also the building of the support and the foundational skills for our students, whether they're in our generalist or the specialization year. And last but not least, why now, is that we do know that we need to be improving the student preparedness and work readiness by building these core skills, both for students to enter field placements, but also for students to graduate from our programs and be ready to hit the ground running. The other piece I want to add is in the many years of doing this, I see the students that are going into the field are being confronted or they're dealing with more and more complicated cases. I have to say over the last 20, 25 years in social work, we've seen decrease in the funding available for programs. We've seen decrease in the number of vacation hours students get, an increase in the number of clients they're dealing with. So I think our students are being asked to deal with more and more of the realities that they're being confronted with, And if we can better prepare them in any way in our educational system, it's really going to help those students go out into the workforce and integrate and be able to do what they need to do for their jobs in a quicker way. So I'm going to turn the next slide over.
So the star of the show is the SOS model for today. And we're going to talk a little bit about what the SOS model is, how, in the upcoming slides, how it was built, and I think most importantly, why we think anybody, could build something like this to help enhance student education and student preparedness for the field. So the SOS model, again, stands for Simulation and On-Site Learning. It is a field ed module that uses simulation-based client experiences to complement face-to-face direct practice. And so as Wanda and Rebecca have sort of alluded to, the SOS model, was based in the belief that we wanted to provide an equitable foundation of practice skills. We want our students to be prepared in both generalist social work practice and clinically integrated social work practice so that they are ready for the workforce and able to do whatever it is that they choose to after graduation. We also wanted to provide a safe place for students to be able to develop professionally. What we find sometimes is, and I think we talk about this in field education a lot, is that field is really where, the rubber meets the road, and that our students take, what they've learned in academic classes and have to be able to translate it. And sometimes, students get into placement, as, we've already talked a little bit about, and they can be at placement and right off the bat be integrating and connecting with clients and with people and be asked to utilize these skills. And so we wanted to, kind of create something that would help bridge that gap for them and to be able to practice in a safe way with real-time feedback and observation of how to do that. So the SOS model that we built, just to kind of put out there, it's a low to no cost model. We are not using actors. We are not, we didn't pay anybody to, a company to come in and build it. This is something that we created in accordance to CSWE competencies and are utilizing, faculty as resources for this model and to run this model within our field education seminars for students. We also, in this simulation and on-site model that we have, it is adaptable to asynchronous online programs, synchronous online programs, or also traditional campus-based programs that are based in the classroom. There are ways that it can be done in all of those versions, and we have trialed out, those versions as well. And I think one of the biggest pieces about this model that we wanted to highlight is that this model is an offering that we are offering our students. It is their choice to participate in this model. They can choose to engage in the simulated practice, which comes before field education, direct practice work, field education. They can choose to engage in the simulated practice and then move into a direct practice site as they would in this model, or they can choose to go directly to a site and engage in traditional field education as they have done for many years in our program. And so we really wanted to kind of empower our students to have as many choices as possible and to be able to choose an option that best fits their learning, their goals, and what they feel is right for them.
So as Christine was mentioning, we are offering this SOS model option at the for both Generalist and Specialization Year, and those versions look a little bit different. So I'm going to talk for a minute about what the Generalist Year SOS model looks like. So in Generalist Year SOS model, students would complete 16 weeks of simulation where they're going to be practicing their foundational skills. So they're going to have the opportunity to work on competencies related to professional behavior, the active listening, effective communication with clients as well as with an interprofessional team. They're going to be practicing using a strengths-based practice, using ethical practice, be considering social justice issues and the intersection of social justice issues with their case and their client, as well as to practice that self-awareness and self-regulation. So the Generalist Year in our model does focus on case management skills. So students will be practicing engaging directly with a simulated client and demonstrating ethical engagement. They will have the opportunity to demonstrate relationship and rapport building with the client. They will have practice with assessment and service planning skills. They will have practice with coordinating with interprofessional team members. They will have opportunities to practice advocating for their clients. And what's very exciting, again, we have an asynchronous online program, and so all of our students are in different portions of the country and sometimes internationally as well. But the simulation is designed to allow students to research and develop resources and referrals within their own communities. So they're not only learning these foundational skills, they're also expanding their learning and the resources within their own communities.
So the specialization year, as Rebecca mentioned, of course, looks a little bit different. It is based on, the way we created it is based on demonstrating CSWE competencies that relate to clinically integrated practice. And it's designed to simulate a clinical experience from beginning to end. So that means from intake to biopsychosocial assessment all the way through discharge planning or endings. It also has a focus on integrating policy and research into clinical practice. And this is something that, when I talk with students who are at field placements, I would say that these areas of competencies are often the ones that students have questions on. How am I supposed to do this in my micro setting? What is this supposed to look like in clinical practice? And so the model really looks to integrate policy and research into clinical practice and sort of make that kind of an ongoing practice that students will have after graduation. And then it also, of course, utilizes the NASW Code of Ethics in and throughout the interactions that students are having with the simulated client, the discussions that they're having, in their, discussions in the classroom, and, the approaches that they're deciding to engage in. So the specialization year reinforces skills such as relationship building. Again, as we talked about biopsychosocial assessments and being able to practice those in sort of a simulated real live way. Treatment planning, assessment tools, the use of assessment tools and what do they mean, being introduced to some of those that are being widely used in practice. Engaging in a treatment plan review, the use of clinical approaches and modalities, being able to develop resources for clients, processing and working through termination and endings, even if, I think that we always talk about, sort of that perfect termination that you've planned for, but oftentimes those endings don't happen that way. And so being able to work through those experiences. And then also, as we talked earlier, integrating policy and research and practice. So some of the approaches that we're using with our students and the way that we've built this model is in line with our practice courses that we have and, our academic courses, which have given students already a foundation academically in these approaches. And so they're paired, nicely with the field education and kind of lead the way, again, to that signature pedagogy. But what we have our students engaging in is cognitive behavioral therapy, motivational interviewing, solution-focused brief therapy, narrative therapy, and also a couple weeks where students are able to choose an approach to practice with the client. So again, in this simulated experience, which we'll talk a little bit more about, done in and we've trialed it out in both ways. So done in a synchronous fashion, we have had a faculty member play a client, and the students are able to engage with that client in a live time session. Of course, we're all in the era of COVID right now, so it did happen over Zoom, but able to engage with that client through the intake process, the biopsychosocial assessment, a review of GAD-7 and PHQ-9 tools, the use of, they were able to practice in role plays with the client using cognitive behavioral therapy, talking about what are the tenets of each of these approaches prior to their use with the client, getting feedback. So again, that enhancement of feedback. So after each student does this in a synchronous session with this virtual client, so to speak, they're provided feedback by their peers. They give their own self-assessment of what happened, and then the instructor in the course, talks about what they saw. And then even further to that, which is something that rarely happens in clinical practice, we ask the virtual client, to give feedback so that they can say, how did it feel to them? So being able to practice sort of all of these approaches and these experiences with clients, has proven to be really important to the students, and also giving them an opportunity to be able to choose, if they really love an approach that we haven't talked about, then research it, introduce it to your peers, be able to have an opportunity to demonstrate that. And in an asynchronous version of this, we're using a combination of, which I think we'll talk a little bit more about, a combination of student-led role plays that are happening virtually, that are recorded and then sent to the instructor for feedback in that manner, as well as times where they come into a live session and they have to demonstrate these skills that they've been practicing live with a virtual client who is a faculty member.
So as the three of us began to put together this presentation to talk with you all, I thought it would be, although I had talked with students who have gone through this, I thought it would be nice to have direct quotes from the students that actually participated in this. The first group of students that we offered this simulation model, or the SOS model to, were really a mixed group of students. They were all students who were nearing their graduation. They were students from communities where finding a placement was difficult. They were students that had had a placement, and due to COVID, their places had shut down or they were no longer able to return to it. They were students that were working massive hours and were not able to go to a site during the day. So it was really an interesting combination of a group of students in the first simulation or SOS that we ran. So what I did, just for to be honest about how we did it, is I sent out an email to all of the students who'd been in the course and said, we're going to be putting together a PowerPoint, and I'd like you to give me a statement about what you think about this course. What I did is I picked the first three that I received. I know I couldn't put all of them in, so I'm going to share with you the first three students that responded. And the first student said, this course allowed me to stay home during a time when it wasn't safe to be in the field. I was able to complete my education without delay, learn what I needed and wanted to learn, and still be safe. This would be a great course for all students who feel they need more practice before starting an internship in the field. I have to tell you, we heard that over and over again. I wish I could have done this before I went into the field, which is now the model that we are sharing with you all today. The second student said, the field simulation course encompasses many different treatment modalities that are essential tools for clinicians. I've enjoyed being able to utilize these methods in the field simulation, whereas I may have only been able to utilize one method if I were on site. The constructive feedback has been key for me to identify ways to grow as a clinician. As they say, we are lifelong learners, and if we aren't learning, we aren't growing. Another thing that a lot of students had shared during the course was the fact that they would go to an agency, and that agency generally used motivational interviewing, or they use CBT, or they use DBT, and they said we don't generally have a chance to work with 4 or 5, different types of therapeutic interventions. So it was nice to be able to use those different interventions. And the last slide, sorry about that. The last student, the third student said, I believe the simulation course is great. I believe you and Instructor Rogerson are preparing us in ways that other students probably wouldn't be prepared when they leave school. So again, the feedback from the students has been exceptional. We have had some feedback that we've integrated about how we could do things a little bit differently, but we had no students who said this doesn't make sense, or I wish I could be at my placement, or I'm not learning what I expected. What we did hear from the students was we're learning a lot more than we expected. So at this point, and even the agencies that we've talked to across the country, we've had incredibly positive feedback about how this is going to help prepare students for going into the field. So I'm going to turn the next slide over.
So again, the why use the SOS model, I think, is sort of the big question of the day. And, we really, in creation of this, and I think we talked a little bit about this, we have a little bit of a pun with the SOS model and sort of being an emergency, creation. But outside of that, we really kind of, sat down and thought, what, we have this kind of internal belief that all students deserve strong foundational skills to be competent practitioners in social work. We want that of our colleagues, and these students are our colleagues. And we want that for all students, regardless of, what their, placement agency is able to provide, or what their, challenges might be, for them personally, or, what geographically they might be facing. So that's one reason about why we are definitely, on board with using the SOS model. The other piece is, for programs out there who have, limited access to resources, this is for us, it was a low to no cost way to be able to create this, a way to really enhance our social work education that we're delivering to students in a way that, didn't utilize a lot of costly resources for us. Again, we're using our own faculty that we have, especially within field faculty, but even academic faculty that have years of clinical practice experience, and being able to tap those resources and utilize those resources in a way, for students to be able to engage in this opportunity. The model also enhances practical application of skills for students prior to field, and that's what we're hearing from the students, that Wanda just talked about in the reflection. So that group of students that Wanda talked about with those quotes, as she said, were students that, kind of came into this from an emergency situation. And so, they had already been in a field placement, and they were saying to us, we could have benefited tenfold over from doing this prior to entering field. I would have been so much more prepared. I would have been more competent. I would have felt more confident. I would have, felt so much more prepared in doing that. And so we're, thought, this is really a reason why to offer students the ability to enhance this practical application skills and kind of do that transition, that bridge work from academic coursework into field. We also, feel like this model acknowledges student differences and opportunities, resources, availability of placements, you kind of name it for students. And so we think that this model helps to address those differences and some of those challenges that students face. It also, by doing the SOS model, we're finding that it's reducing barriers to students. It's reducing costs to students, such as travel to and from placement, mileage, gas, care. They might have to pay for a caretaker for those they're caring for, or just other types of barriers. Wanda mentioned, the ability in our asynchronous, classroom to be able to do some of this during non-traditional hours, which is super important to our asynchronous population. But when we've done it in a synchronous fashion as well, being able to, engage in that within their own schedules, responsibilities, and being able to really focus on the field opportunity in a different way. And then I think last but not least, which we're about to dive into, is this was built, both of these models for Generalist Year and Specialization Year were built using the CSWE competencies. So we're, are basing this in the CSWE competencies and how to be able to demonstrate competencies for students when they engage in this opportunity.
Christine, before you go to the next slide, I just wanted to share, one of the other things, and I've heard both myself, Christine, and Rebecca share this a little bit, but one of the things I wanted to say is I think we've known for years that when we have students in academic courses, it's always been a bit of a challenge for our students to go from those academic into a field placement and to integrate those skills in that work setting. And one of the things that I think this SOS model has brought to light is an even bigger significance in that. And I've been talking to some of my colleagues across the country who share so many of our students are in their academic courses and they do very well. They're getting A's, they're getting B's, they're integrating the material. But what happens is that academic is a place where they're reading and writing and interpreting what's being said. But when they end up going in field, they have to really move into a different mode. They have to be the one then who's interacting with the client. And I think Christine just used this word, the bridge piece. One of the things that the SOS model allows is they're in the classroom, they're doing very well. The bridge piece, and one of the things we talked a little bit about in the course when Christine and I first taught it, is the fact that this becomes a safe setting to begin to use these modalities that they've never had to use with clients. So in that safe setting, they begin to develop that confidence, and then they move on. So it's rather than those two steps, which seem to be there's a big gap and they fall in between it, there's now 3 steps. So that SOS in between allows us. And then the other piece, which we haven't said, is it's also brought to light in some ways some of the gaps in, I think, our MSW curriculum across the country, and how do we continue to integrate more simulations in the academic courses so the students are learning some of those skills in a different way in the academic, in the simulation, and then being prepared to go in the field. So I just want to add that. I think this has allowed us to really step back and look at everything we're doing in our program and continue to hone and make it better for our students. Thanks, Christine.
You're welcome. So the next 3 slides are just a little snippet for anyone out there that's curious about how we integrated CSWE competencies. These are just some of our examples, and they really align with, of course, being able to complete that evaluation at the end for the field experiences, which is super important. And so, this is, the examples here are based on our Specialization Year clinical integrated competencies and opportunities for students. And so as you can see, outlining specific assignments and activities that the students are going to do in the experience itself that helps to identify and meet these goals and competencies. All of the students are doing an ethics presentation as part of their work in the simulation. The presentations have just been incredible. They're taking, portions of the Code of Ethics, and they're talking about, real live things that they're seeing out in their communities and how that's, affecting people and what that looks like for people. They're integrating policy into that, practice, and they're integrating research. We're, using the treatment plan assignment, the biopsychosocial assignment, the progress notes, the live client sessions or asynchronous client sessions to be able to demonstrate these competencies and do that in a way, where students are not only feeling confident themselves, but also we have a checkpoint to be able to say, yes, they've met this mark, and we know that they've met this mark, and here's why. And so one of, our, things that we've been doing is before each client session, students are asked to engage in practice-informed research and then research, using that research in session. So, being able to engage in finding, peer-reviewed sources and sources to be able to inform what they're doing with clients as they relate to each modality, and how to be able to use that research in practice, which I think is something, that Wanda talked about with that bridge, is so important. And then, of course, here is the ending of the CSWE competencies and how, some examples of how we are evaluating those.
So in conclusion, we just want to kind of just share, although this model was really built out of an emergency response or in a response to the emergency that the current COVID-19 pandemic presented to us, because our students, again, we had to pull students out of placements and other students weren't able to go back into placement or begin into placement. It really has evolved and turned into something for us that's even bigger and more powerful. So we really feel that this opportunity, this pandemic, has presented an opportunity for us to reflect upon and examine the ways that we have traditionally been providing field education experiences, and we hope that we're building a better, stronger way to provide support and to provide guidance to our students as they develop what we hope are going to be long-lasting foundational social work skills. And we hope that you find this model compelling as well, and find it interesting to think about how you may adopt some of these for your own students. So this is the end of our presentation. Again, we hope that you found our model and our information helpful. I'm going to now turn it over to the moderator to facilitate the conversation around any questions or comments that you may have.
What a great presentation and an awesome model. We have about 15 minutes left and we have quite a few really good questions, so I'll dive into them right away. The first one is, and some of our clarification, but I think they're important to ask, is the SOS model asynchronous or synchronous?
That's a great question, Jack. So I'll dive in. It's Christine. So we have built it in two ways. We've built it to be synchronous. It can be used in the classroom, and it can be used synchronous online. And the first way that we trialed it out is in a synchronous fashion, I guess I would say, so to speak. And then we have also built it to be asynchronous. So we have both versions.
Or I would like to add, this is Wanda, all three versions. You could use it as a hybrid online. You could completely do this in the classroom face-to-face, or you could do it completely asynchronous for students. One of the things we wanted to do is figure out how it could be offered in any format. So it's any of those three. And I do, I'm just jumping ahead a little bit, Jack, but I do want to say, I know there's been several questions about the hours, and I just want to share this. So we want to be very clear. So the way this is set up is students who go into their generalist year who do this SOS would do the SOS the first 16 weeks. That would count. So for our generalist year students, they would be earning 450 hours of field. The SOS model would count for 225 of that. It would be half of their generalist placement. If they opt to do this model in their specialization year, they would be doing 550 hours. Half of those hours would count for the SOS model for that first 16 weeks. They would then do the second half of the 550 hours on site in a live agency. So the hours do count. And the way we created this, I know there's a few questions about that. What we tried to figure out, and we've honed it, is if a student would have been in placement, say, 20 hours a week, we've created 20 hours with everything they're doing online in this, so they will be doing 20 hours of the SOS model. So they're counting that as their 20 hours of field placement for the first half, which is why we refer to it as SOS, simulation and on-site. Their field placement is a combination of both, and both the simulation and the on-site count as their hours.
So Wanda, that's a really good point.
Yep.
Was there anything, did I cut you off when you were about to add something?
Nope, I think we're ready for more questions.
Super. I have one to build on that question. There's a couple questions in here Wanda, about the percentage of the curricula in terms of like what percentage is simulation, text-based, what percentage is video?
And I'll let Christine jump in with me. We didn't figure that way percentage-wise. Again, what happens in the SOS model is it is a combination, and I don't know that we can really break it out for you today. It's a combination of doing videos, doing role plays with each other. So whether students do that live or through a Zoom format, they will be sitting together and doing role plays with each other. They will be creating their own videos. They will be creating their own presentations on ethics and ethical dilemmas. They will be talking with each other about self-care. They will be practicing, clinical modalities. But we didn't break it out within each SOS to say 25% is a video, 25% is this. There's discussion forums. I don't, Christine, do you want to add to my answer to that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, absolutely. So what I can say is that in our synchronous version, we tried to keep it in accordance to what, the time frame of a field integrated seminar course would look like. So students were live with us for about, 2 hours, which some of our, field integrated seminar courses are a little bit longer than that, of course. But, for this model and this trial, they were live with us each week for about 2 hours. And then all of the rest of the work that they did were assignments and hours, like Wanda said, 20 to 25 hours per week. So 2 of these hours were in the classroom, but the remaining 23 hours per week were done with specific assignments that they needed to complete, things they needed to research, information they needed to gather, discussion boards they needed to engage in, all of those types of things, treatment plans they needed to complete, progress notes weekly that they did. So all of the paperwork and the extra pieces that go along with interacting with a client as well.
Thank you. We have quite a few questions about the use of faculty in developing the program. How is faculty time accounted for? Are these faculty members already teaching in the program? Do you have to hire new faculty to execute the SOS model?
I'll jump in and let Christine and Rebecca jump in behind me. This is Wanda again. So the way we created this originally is Rebecca and Christine and myself are all full-time faculty at UNE. And at UNE, we run more seminars, so we have adjuncts who help teach seminars. The 3 of us created the SOS model. We don't have any special software. I know somebody asked about that. This is run through Blackboard. We have a Blackboard format that we run our courses. We will be switching over eventually to Brightspace, but this is run in Blackboard. We did not buy any special software. We do use Zoom. That's where students are, they do some of their PowerPoints and we meet on Zoom. We will eventually use some of our adjuncts who teach our seminars to teach the SOS model. We didn't hire extra. This, again, if you're running, for example, at your university, we run a seminar. So when a student goes in field, they would be in a seminar, and this seminar would become the SOS. So rather than them being on site and coming to seminar, they will go in seminar, and that will be their site. So essentially, no, we don't see where it's going to cost more. We don't see where we need to hire more faculty. It is a different training model for some of our faculty. We also at UNE, when we have adjuncts teaching our seminars, one of the field faculty, myself, Rebecca, or Christine, are what we call course leads, so we're available to consult with those students, but it is not, that's one of the things we wanted to create is a program that is not cost heavy for universities. Given COVID-19 and given the economic problems that I think we're going to face over the next maybe 10 years, maybe more, we did not want to create something the universities have to come up with money to put forth. Christine, Rebecca?
It's Christine. I absolutely 100% agree. Just to reiterate, the SOS model, that simulation is sort of, it's a trade for trade, whatever teaching load full-time faculty are engaging in for field integrated seminars or adjunct faculty are engaging in for field integrated seminars. This seminar is they would either do a traditional seminar where people are on site, or they would do this seminar where they're here in the classroom.
Yeah, and this is Rebecca, and I think that one of the things that I really like about this model is that we do use faculty as the client, so the clients are the faculty are role-playing a client. And why I really like that, and I think that there's a lot of benefit to that versus hiring an actor, is that all of us have had a significant amount of experience working with clients in the field. So we know a lot of the common presenting issues that come up, sort of pitfalls with some of the maybe assessment tools that we use, or things that can kind of go awry in treatment planning or things like that. And so we're really able to use our experience serving clients in the past to play clients and to be presenting common issues and to really be helping students be prepared for the types of things that they're going to see once they go out and practice. So not only do we have faculty who is acting as a seminar instructor and providing the feedback, we also have the faculty that are acting as those clients and able to give that kind of real authentic experience as well.
Thank you. How about feedback from agencies? How have agencies across the country reacted to this new model of field placements, if at all?
So I'm kind of surprised by this, and this is Wanda, and as I said, when we first started talking about online education in 2009, I continued to walk into wall after wall of agencies that said, we don't believe in this. I have, and I know it will, and I don't want to make this sound kind of Pollyanna, I have yet to have one agency say, we don't think this is right. When we talk about what this is, and I think Christy and Rebecca will agree, they are amazed by this, they are excited by this, because again, I think agencies weren't able to really put it in words, some of the gaps between the academia and the field, and I think when we talk about this, they agree that it's going to bridge that gap for some of their students. And I think they know their students are asked to take on more complicated cases, and they see this as a benefit. Students are excited. I've yet to have a student say, I don't want to do this. Agencies are thrilled by it. Field instructors are thrilled by it. I've talked to a lot of adjuncts that are teaching who are very excited by it. So I have to tell you, I'm quite amazed, and I'm ready for it. I know somebody's going to say we don't agree with this, but up to this point, I've yet to face any really challenges that said they don't think this is the way to go. I believe strongly that we're going to see more and more schools that they may not offer at the same degree as this, but I think this is going to become a part of our field education for our students as we move into the future.
Thank you. There's a couple questions about the role of the field supervisor. Do you have both a field supervisor from UNE and a practice supervisor from outside of the university responsible for feedback during the experience?
Yep. Christine, do you want to take that?
Yeah, sure. So that's a really great question. So in the SOS model, remember there's two things that's happening. The first part is that simulated, client experience within, embedded in the classroom. And so for that, everyone who teaches in our field integrated practicum seminars are, social workers, and they meet the CSWE requirements to be field instructors. And so we are pairing, and utilizing those instructors to play, sort of a simultaneous role, I guess, so to speak, if you think of it in traditional field, language of where the instructor, could be your field instructor in that simulated experience, giving that feedback, signing those documents, doing all of those types of things, but also facilitating that field integrated practicum seminar, and that's for that simulated portion. Then when students go on site, absolutely, they would have a field instructor at the agency, ideally, to be able to provide that supervision. So they kind of get, lots of supervision and feedback from different people and social workers throughout the process.
Thank you. We also have a few questions about whether the program is applicable to only clinical concentration or to community concentration?
So we, as many programs across the country, UNE at one time had 3 specializations. We had what we called integrated, which was community and macro, clinical and macro. We had macro, and we have clinical. And UNE is moving towards what we call an integrated concentration. So all of our students who are coming in will be taking placements that are a combination of macro and clinical. We will not be offering a straight community track. So this is set up for a clinical/macro field placement.
All right. Here's a good one. Given that students are using technology to deliver services remotely during the pandemic, does your curriculum include in-depth coverage of the relatively new NASW, ASWB, CSWE, and CSWA technology standards?
So I can jump in on this one, and I am going to say absolutely 100%. This is something that we felt really passionate about, especially during this, time frame, and we are absolutely integrating those pieces, making sure that we're up to date with those, changes, the recently new changes, using, new resources that have come out for online and distance behavioral health, and ethics and risk management in regards to that, and being able to engage students in telehealth trainings, talk with them about, the difference between, that virtual practice, the telehealth world, where those extra layers of ethics live, and what ethics looks like in all of those capacities.
Can I'm scrolling down through some of the questions, and I think there's a couple. I just want to answer 2 really quick ones, and I think there's another one that we're going to get to, but I just want to say 2 things really quick. There is a question, is this mandatory or an option? This is an option. If a student says, I would like to go to my placement for the entire 32 weeks and be out of sight and do my placement, whether it's generalist or specialization, they can do this. This is an option. So we would allow students to pick what works best for them. And the second very quick question I want to answer is, what is the cost for this and how can we obtain it? We are not selling anything to you all today. This is a model we've developed. We hope everybody can create something similar. We're willing to talk with people about it, but we are not looking to make money. We don't have a program or a CD that we want to sell you. We've put this together. It seems to be working. It seems to reduce barriers. It seems to be a way that we can put more social workers out in the community and be better prepared, and we're just sharing that knowledge with you all. We're not here as salespeople. I want to be very clear about that.
I also just want to piggyback on that, Wanda. It's Christine again, that we are happy to answer questions, after today's presentation. If you have questions, about this, how you can do it, we're happy to engage in that.
I think there's actually a couple instances of this question, which is good to address it. Can the SOS model be paired with the field placement?
Yeah, so it's a really great question. The SOS model doesn't exist. The simulated practice doesn't exist without the on-site direct practice as well. So it is a paired model, kind of something that happens in conjunction. I will say, as of today, that, is sort of our understanding of the regulations through CSWE, and that, field education has, optimally would happen on site, but that you can use simulated experiences if they happen in a field integrated practicum seminar course. Of course, I think there were some questions that I'm scrolling through as well. If the pandemic continues, I don't know. I have no idea how those regulations will change, or if, totally, online simulated practice experiences will be counted. That's, we'll just sort of wait for direction on that.
to address. I noticed there were some questions about sort of what's the difference between, like, how is this different than role playing? And I think this is different because we have created case studies that are really specific, have really specific presenting issues, as well as we have guidance for sort of how to have the students be practicing particular things. So it's not sort of a free-for-all role play where you have somebody that doesn't really have any structure and they just kind of take the role playing wherever it might go. We have really specific pieces, again, in presenting issues that are going to allow the students to practice different skills. So it's while role playing is a part of it, they're role playing with specific guidance and information, if that's helpful.
And we would be happy to continue, if you want to email us. Again, like I said, we're very excited. We feel this is a way that can enhance students' education, and we just wanted to share that information with everybody.
And that's very generous. Everyone's contact information is actually up on the slide that's currently being displayed. And I do think that we're right at 3 o'clock, but I do think it's worth asking the question because it really is the most common question throughout this afternoon is, what are the steps, or are there any opportunities for people on this webinar to take a look at the syllabus or how you've done this and see it actually as an example in practice?
That's a good question, and I have to say, as we're morphing and working on it, we don't have any clear examples that we can share with you. I do think it might, I don't know, I'm trying to think about how we can continue to even answer some of these questions. And again, the syllabus I want to share, because we do it in Blackboard, it's a little bit different than a syllabus that's done in a course. So if you were to look at the syllabus, it wouldn't give you everything that's in it in Blackboard. I don't know if some of you teach in Blackboard. There's different layers of how it's done in discussions and assignments, and so it's built in a little bit of a different way. And I'm not trying to make it complicated, but teaching online sometimes is a lot of layers. So, but I do think, we can continue to talk with you all if you're interested in this. But we don't have any clear examples. Christine, did I miss anything on that?
Yeah, I was going to say, just to add in, for anybody who's looking for some guidance, some examples, I'd be happy. This is Christine again. If you want to email and say that you're interested in those types of things, we can figure out, through, our powers that be, what we're able to share and put something like that together.
Well, we're now at 5 after. I'm just going to hop in and say our presenters have generously offered in our little chat box to stay and address some additional questions. If people do have a hard stop, I did want to thank the audience for spending the afternoon with us. We hope you enjoyed the session and at Social Work today. We hope you please come back, and we do thank our sponsor, again, University of New England's Online MSW program, for the support of today's program, but we can keep going now and address some of the questions that remain. So here's one. A point of clarification is that students spend the first semester in simulation and then earn their hours, and in the second semester, they're in the field placement for an additional time period?
Yes, Jack, absolutely. So half of the field hours, whether they're Generalist Year or Specialization Year, half of those hours will be simulated. They would do a first semester, 16 weeks in the simulation, and then the other half of their field placement, which is direct half of those hours, would be on site at a placement. And I think, Jack, I'm just going to jump in here. There's another question about, as I know people are looking for examples, can you share a little bit about, the scenarios that you've all prepared? And so this is Christine again. I can share a little bit about the client experience, the sort of simulated client experience that was created. So the case study for the simulated client experience in the clinical simulation is based off of a individual who identifies as female and is caretaking for a young son prior to kindergarten age, and the son has been, is going through the process of being diagnosed with kind of a lifelong illness. And the mom has, stopped working full-time, really loves to work, but has stopped working full-time to become a full-time caregiver for their son. The mom's partner is, out working and travels quite a bit for work. And so the whole role play is based off of anxiety that the client is feeling. That's the whole reason that brings them into the session, and they talk about that. But then as you kind of go through the client sessions, there's also a lot of talk about the relationship that the client has with their partner, what that looks like, and sort of just kind of understanding those pieces.
Thanks.
And also some of the grief and loss issues with, being diagnosed, having a child that's diagnosed with a lifelong illness. And then Rebecca, do you want to speak briefly about the Generalist Year?
Sure. So Generalist Year, the case that we are using is a client who has been diagnosed with a significant cancer. The role of the social worker is to be a social worker within the Cancer Institute, or a patient navigator as they're sometimes called, and to really assist the client with needs so that they can access appropriate care. And so there are issues that are relating to stable housing. There's issues related to IPV or interpersonal violence. There's issues related to safety planning, so suicidality, things like that. There's issues related to medical decision making. And then there's issues related to just general resources and sort of availability of financial support, things like Social Security disability and application process for that, as well as things like food, so to help with any food insecurity issues, and social supports as well.
Excellent.
One of the questions that's somewhat related to it is, could this model be used with BSW students or just MSW? So as I'm kind of talking about the Generalist Year, so our Generalist Year model really follows what a BSW model would look like. And so yes, this can be used with bachelor's level using for the Generalist SOS model, or in MSW where you would use both the Generalist as well as the Specialization Year models.
And I just want to say, as we talk about that, one of the things we talked a lot about today is some of the, kind of filling in some of the inequities, trying to level the playing field, all of those things. And one of the things that this does, on top of the fact that we believe it will enhance education in a better way, is it allows students to cut the number of hours. Christine talked about this a little bit, that they need to leave their home in half. So again, when we have students that are trying to work, they're trying to caretake, they're trying to parent, they're trying to be in the military. We once had a student that I believe was in a tent in Qatar, maybe trying to take online courses. This allows some of our students to spend the first 16 weeks learning the same course objectives within their home. They can do it after hours, they can do it in the evenings, they can do it on Saturday, they can do it on Sunday morning. So there are times when we've had students say to us, I wanted this MSW, but I can't be in the field this much. I can't give up my job. I can't cut my hours. So we're hoping that the other piece of this is that this would allow students to do that first half from the safety of their home, and if they need to cut hours, rather than over 32 weeks, they only have to do that for 16. So I do want to make sure that although that's not the reason we're doing it, it's a side benefit that we really hope will help students.
To that point, and I think this is our last question that we'll address. When it's a half and half situation, or a half simulation, half agency, Have you found any difficulty in placing the student for the shorter amount of time with the agency?
It's a really great question. So I will say my easy answer is not yet. Actually, we found the opposite in most of our agencies that were, placing students or talking about this with, students, and agencies, because we like to have things set up, ahead of time for students. Agencies are saying the exact opposite to us. There's a little sense of relief sometimes that they, can still engage with a student and provide that experience for a student, but they don't have to be responsible for 32 weeks, which is quite a long time. And they're also feeling like, you're going to send me a student who's had some practice in this, and I can, begin to use them in a way that I might not have been able to before. What I will say is that there are going to be some agencies that this model doesn't work with because they do have specific time, requirements for students, and, that they want the students there on site for the full experience. And so we would, encourage any of our students, if I was working with them, if they're interested in a site such as that, then the SOS model, isn't really their best choice.
All right. Well, we've come to the end of the session. Thank you very much for staying over time. There was a lot of excitement and anticipation for today's session, and we here at Social Work Today want to thank you, Christine, Wanda, and Rebecca, for sharing your time and expertise on this exciting model, which is perfectly timely.
Thank you.
And again, thank you to our sponsor, University of New England's Online MSW program, for your support of today's presentation. Have a great, healthy, and safe week ahead.